We'll now start our next session on achieving the quadruple aim, which is both a series of lightning talks and then a panel discussion. And I'd like to invite up our chair of the panel, Professor Chris Bullen, who is the Director of the National Institute for Health Innovation at the University of Auckland. And Chris is both a Fellow of the Faculty of Public Health Medicine in Australasia and in New Zealand, and also has a PhD in Community Medicine from the University of Auckland. Great. Thanks, Professor Bullen.
Kia ora, Matt, and what a fantastic couple of days this has been. It's been exceptional value, I think. I'm sure you'd all agree. Okay, we've got a fairly tight timeline here, but I'm going to just preface this session. It's all about achieving the quadruple aim in healthcare, which is improving population health, reducing costs, improving patient experience, and improving workforce experience. And the sort of subheading for the session is around doing this through improving cross-sectoral collaboration. We touched on this morning's session around the value in linking data sets and gaining value and intelligence to inform policy change from Kari's talk, which was a great, a really inspirational presentation, I thought. So to help us with this, we've got a series of outstanding speakers, and they're going to speak to us, and most of them will then form part of a panel, and you'll be able to interact with them and fire questions at them using Slido or the app, or we'll pass the microphone around. We'll probably have about 20 minutes for that before we need to wrap up. So I'd like to invite our first speaker, who's got a plane to catch very shortly. John Herries. You've seen John in the sessions. He's Group Manager, Emerging Health Technology for the Ministry of Health. Trained originally as a physiotherapist, but he's gone on a journey since then and become quite involved with the whole area of health technology. And thank you very much, John. And you're going to be replaced on the panel by Andrew Simpson, who's the Chief Medical Officer for the Ministry of Health. So, thank you. So, just to say, each of our speakers has got 7 minutes, so I'm going to be reasonably ruthless with chairing, so you'll have to cut to the chase. Thank you.
Kia ora, my name's John. My whakapapa, because that's what we've been doing here, is Ngāti Ruanui from the Taranaki, but I hail originally from Taranganui Kiwa, which is Gisborne for some people. And I'm kind of going to lift things up a little bit out of what I see machine learning and AI being a use of data to talk a little bit about the kind of broader conversation, which is loosely and sometimes in a woolly way described as social license. Point being, what I think the ministry is interested in is dealing with a number of issues as they relate to data, particularly in the context of kind of where we are today and where we'll be in the future. The diagram on the left-hand side is really just to indicate the fact that using information in an algorithm is only part of the process. We need to make sure that when we collect the data, when we maintain the data, when we publish the data, and when we finish using the data, we've got processes, governance, and the right people in place to make sure that we're doing this safely. Okay. What we see in the ministry is that there are growing expectations that we use data proactively. We use it to take autonomous decisions or supervised action. But this is in a context where there's never been more data available. New tools make it more accessible every day. And there's a need for us to continue to maintain and to build trust with the public. Some of you may have seen the Motherboard article this week or last week where the US phone carriers were caught giving phone location data out on American citizens. They were selling it to bounty hunters in the US. That stopped happening this week. It was announced yesterday morning that the phone carriers in the US will no longer be doing that. The only reason why is what the public thinks of that. Another thing that we're very interested in is the continued data breaches that are going on. Further linking and further aggregation of data increases the risk that we'll all be targets. There's more information released on the Singapore hack this morning. Turns out they'd been inside the Singapore environment for 18 months before anything happened. And they got through multiple layers of security, including a Citrix environment, which is kind of interesting. But at the same time, we're making tools which make analysis more and more easy. So there's lots of things going on in this space, some good and some not so good. From a ministry perspective, I've got a number down in that bottom corner, which is 500 gigabytes, and I'm going to zoom through this slide because it might surprise you to learn our current ministry collections, while it sounds like a lot of data, is less than a hard drive than you'd go and buy from Noel Lemmings. That being said, the data being generated out there in the world, which maybe we could take advantage of, grows at a much faster rate. So Facebook grows their data at 3 megabytes per person per day. A smart home grows its data set by about 90 megabytes per house per day. The latest Apple Watch with the new ECG grows data sets at 4 megabytes per person per day. And a genomic data set, a whole genome sequence, is about 120 gigs. So you can see for an individual, we're going to start to build some very big data sets very quickly in the context of those challenges and opportunities I talked about on the previous slide. You would have seen something appear there which was about the fact that we need to think about data linkage being by explicit consent or preference. This is not something that we go and do in a back room because we think it's the right thing to do. Come back to that social license question of us, if the public found out, what would they think? Māori found out we were trying to assert their taonga, what would they think? So to kind of summarise social licence, I started kind of with a very basic framework which talks about laws as a basic premise of a society, which is built upon by legitimacy. So having not just an understanding of what the law is, but also the local customs and how you manage society. On top of that sits credibility. So once you have laws and once you have legitimacy, you can think about becoming a credible data user or processor, to use GDPR speak. Once you've done that, actually, that's the point that you become trusted. Okay, so once you become trusted, you can move your relationship from being a transactional one to being one based on a partnership, which I think is fundamental for us if we're to think about how we use data in the future. We don't want to be using it in a transactional way, we want to be using it as a partnership. Okay. Which gets me onto the exciting bit, which is kind of what we're doing. I said we kind of see things as a bigger picture. So you can see there's a lot of stuff going on this slide. From a data perspective, we've kind of got two buckets we think about things in. We've got a data guardianship bucket, which talks about rights and responsibilities, privacy, security, consent, governance, and data sovereignty. And then we've got a data assets side. So we talk about national digital services. We're starting to use the term national data assets. And in that orange one, I wanted to tell you today that we've put something on our website yesterday, which is some introductory guidance, which we've used some people in this audience to help us put together in a small workshop last year, which is about how you might go about developing algorithms in healthcare in New Zealand. As you'll see, it's a draft. What we want is your feedback. Okay? I don't have all of the answers, you know. There are a lot of answers we need. I don't have them all, so I need you to help me. I'm going to skip over the next slide because I'm being told to hurry up. But essentially, if we're to move to this partnership model, what we need to do and what we're trying to do is move to a model whereby people can contribute their own information, can control their own information, and can maintain and update their own information. Something we're working on at the moment is an app which removes the health system's authority on your data, puts you in control, lets you sign up at home on the couch. And you'll see a button there which talks about your willingness to participate in research. So you might start with it ticked, and you choose to untick it if you don't want to participate. It's more direct, more partnership style approach to this. Okay. We see that moving from one button to being a more granular approach, increasing transparency about what the data is being used for, and increasing availability of data for research. That's where we are. It's where we live. You can scan that with your camera and join. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Professor Gorman, who's Executive Chair of Health Workforce New Zealand, recent ex-director of ACC, Professor of Medicine at Auckland University, etc., etc. Des, over to you. Thanks very much.
Kia ora tātou. Great pleasure to be here, and by the way, this is the last formal presentation I'll give on behalf of Health Workforce New Zealand, so there's a certain sense of relief in that. The lightning talk I like to give on virtual healthcare, and a promise that is generally still awaited, and I'm contrasting the New Zealand health system here with, for example, other health systems I work in, like Kaiser or partners, where virtualisation is a reality. Last year, for example, 16-17, Kaiser took its 110 million physician visits and virtualised 52% of it. In that context, we are very much in our infancy, and the question is why? And here's a story. I mean, this is actually not my auntie, that's my grandmother and me and one of my sisters, but I'm using this as a facsimile for one of my Maori auntie in Northland. She had diabetes, she had unstable diabetes, she kept falling over. The time it took her to have her insulin dose adjusted to the point that she had stable blood sugar levels was 4 months. There were 4 GP visits, there was 2 visits to see a physician, there were 2 hospitalisations from falls, and her daughter took 5 days off work. So that's the transactional reality of her diabetes management. Another version of her story is that a health worker could have gone out because of her wearable indicated she had fallen over, downloaded the information on that wearable while she was looking through the cupboards and looking at the food, chatting to neighbours. A virtual health team could have rationalised the problems with her health care and then given a new health plan all within an hour. And the question is, what are the barriers, that second version, that virtual version, that 1 hour version in someone's home becoming a reality? And it's not the technology, because that technology has existed for decades. What is it that holds that virtualisation back? Well, there are a number of things. The first of them, of course, is regulatory. The virtual health team could be based anywhere. How do we regulate that virtual health team? Because our obsession, an understandable obsession with patient safety, means we have a strong focus on regulatory processes. The second issue there is, how do we fund people? Because in a virtual team which is funded to outcomes and it's not transactional, how do we fund people to play virtually? The third thing is, my profession, we're fully aware that on a virtual health team, if we don't add value, we won't be part of the team. And we see ourselves as being cut out of the loop. And the final reason, of course, is the reason why, the way in which we go about planning healthcare. If we look at this virtuous cycle, this bears nothing like the way in which the Ministry of Health of the DHBs plan healthcare. Absolutely nothing. For a start, at the very top of that cycle is health need. We have little or no understanding of the health needs of our communities. We are one of the few service industries who pay little or no attention to who we serve and what their expectations and needs are. It's a breathtaking arrogance. If you don't know need, you don't understand the user requirements, you have no chance of delivering services people want. The other is, we start in that bottom right-hand corner as you look at it, and we don't actually look at what is the delivery solutions we need to underpin a model of care. We actually plan by saying, what IT resources do we have, what capital have we spent, what assets do we have, what workforce do we have, and we project linearly forward. And that's the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at our health system in 2019, it looks just like it did in Victorian England in 1850. It has not changed. Why would it? If you start from the solution, you end up exactly where you started from. Let me show you quickly what a preferred solution set looks like and how you end up liberating health planning. The first is that there are things called shadow price considerations. What I mean by that is, you may choose a model of care on the basis that it has a shadow value. For example, you may choose a model of care which deliberately employs an unemployed group because the shadow value is that you've actually reduced local unemployment. And then there's some design tools, and I'll just quickly show you these now. If we look at quadrants of healthcare against predictability and complexity, we can look at predictable non-complex, predictable complex, and so on. Now, in fact, one of the reasons why artificial intelligent algorithms have failed to materialise benefit is because they've been put into the wrong quadrant. We've tried to use them to undertake care for non-predictable complex needs, which are generally bio-psychosocial. The whole point of medical research is to shift as much from the bottom right-hand corner to the top left-hand corner, because the minute healthcare becomes predictable, you can put a rule on it. The minute you can put a rule on it, you can automate it. The minute you can put automation, you can have very cheap but high value healthcare solutions. The fact is we don't plan with a context of predictability and complexity, because if we did, we'd be looking to target, for example, bottom right-hand corner is probably the only place that doctors add value. The other issue is that we don't actually seriously think about the life journey and the consumer, and I'm suggesting here that most of us will spend our lives well and happy, God willing. We'll have intercurrent health problems, and at some stage we'll become sick. And the role of the citizen then, what is the right words? Well, when we are looking at wellness and happiness, we own our health. When we have intercurrent health care, we participate. It's participatory health care. We're a consumer, we're a client. When we're sick, we're a patient, and we want to be cared for. It makes no sense to me whatsoever that health system planning wouldn't take this into account, because the health system has to reflect the same sort of thing, and that is, if the issue is wellness and happiness, we have a health system that provides support and preventive services. That's a place virtualisation can play. When we have intercurrent health problems, similarly, we have participatory care, we have consent, we have information brokerage rather than information ownership, and we have people choosing to take up healthcare which they may or may not use. That's another place that virtualisation can occur. But when I'm desperately sick and I want someone to hold my hand and I'm in intensive care, I don't want to see your artificial intelligence algorithms, frankly. I want to see a human who will care for me in that moment of need. The point I'm making here is that one of the reasons why we have not virtualised healthcare to the extent we have is because we don't understand user requirements, we don't understand their needs, we don't think about predictability and complexity, we don't think about the role of the consumer. So why has Kaiser done so well and we've done so badly? There are two reasons. Kaiser understands it's a service industry. They understand explicitly what their people want and how they expect it to be delivered. The other is, sadly, Kaiser can afford to fail, whereas our public health system can't. Thank you very much.
Era was Regional Commissioner for Social Development in Northland and Auckland at the Ministry of Social Development. He's trained as a lawyer, has an MBA, and many other facets which I think are going to add value to what he brings to us this afternoon. So thank you very much, Era.
Thank you. Kia ora, everyone. I drew this short straw because I'm after Des, but it's useful because some of the things that Des refers to I'll cover off as well. And just in terms of my presentation, I realise that there's a bit of time pressure, so I'll just get this going in the background. This is a bit of Monty Python. I thought, it's like the after lunch session, we'll get a bit of comedy and humour into this. We're not the Ministry of Silly Walks, we're the Ministry of Social Development. In terms of our role, we've got a critical role in terms of leading the social sector. Over 6,000 staff. Like ACC, we sit on a whole lot of data assets. We serve 1 in 3 New Zealanders. We also fund a whole lot of government programs that you might not know that MSD fund, like the It's Not Okay campaign, Oscar childcare programs and the like. What I'm going to talk to you about, I suppose the reason that I said yes to my brother was, in terms of presenting here, was an opportunity to come and talk to a whole lot of data scientists, and so I'm recruiting. So if you want to join a team that's doing some really cool stuff, have a chat to me after this. What we've got here is some information that I requested 6 years into my role as Regional Commissioner. The red line is our actual performance. These are our working age benefit numbers for the North, and the blue is the forecast, which is the economic prediction of where we would have landed. I'll talk a little bit more in terms of some of the things we've done to beat that prediction. One of them is our youth focus. So what we've got there is our NEET rates from 2005 through to 2018. Our flagship program, POUTAMA TAITAMARIKI, is one of the big reasons why we've seen that fall. It's a bit busy, that diagram, but basically what we've used is predictive modelling and some design thinking, some of the stuff that Des has referred to in terms of user-centred design, and as a consequence of that, we reached our lowest net rate ever in Northland. And that's a really important indicator. When I first started, you'll see that the net rate was up near 20%. We had the highest net rate in the country. And in my view, the critical contributors to that result, one was really passionate and committed leadership. Another one was some of the predictive modelling that we'd done to target and actually propose the case for focusing on our young people. It was a pretty easy one. The lifetime liability for a Māori who grows up, a young Māori who grows up in an intergenerational benefit dependent household in the north is 249k. So some of the stuff that Des has referred to, I see as a useful model for achieving some of these results. The other important thing though is the user-centred design. Now, when we started in Northland, we kind of just did it. We went through the ideation, incubation, scaling model that some of you might be familiar with from Stanford. Last year I went and did some study to actually now put a framework around some of the stuff that we just got on and did. You'll see data science there is the thing that I personally think would be really valuable to enhance some of those results that we've achieved in Northland. Hence my desire to talk to some of you after this presentation. But if we just go back to some of the useful things we're doing with He POUTAMA TAITAMARIKI, this is a new report that gets generated on a monthly basis. The whole service delivery model is based on the young person's view of the world, how they see things from their perspective. We're gathering new information on their experience with not just welfare but education and other government-funded or government systems. One of the interesting ones there is that you'll see is the number of Māori enrolled in the service. Now that's disproportionate. Also the number of stand-downs in terms of those enrolled in the service. So you can just see that there are some systemic issues that we have for a lot of our young people growing up in New Zealand. One of the great things that we're doing is we're being bold and we're just getting out there and giving it a go. Using, obviously there are some ethical considerations which others will speak to as part of this, these sessions. But one of the things with working in Northland is we're starting from a relatively low base. There's been long run issues up there. And when I talk about committed aspirational leadership, a lot of it starts with trying to create a new narrative for the North. I don't really get out of the North very often, and I don't really talk about this because we're too busy doing the mahi, so this is a bit like the big reveal. It's all heading in the right direction, and I think it's been validated enough now that I can be confident that we're doing something different and special. How am I doing for time? 1 minute. All right. In terms of some of the stuff that might be a little bit more in line with the program here, MSD's currently using two predictive models. One's the service effectiveness model, one's the lifetime estimator tool. They're both online on the MSD website if you want to take a look at that. We're taking a considered approach, so we've developed the privacy, human rights and ethics framework. That's also on the MSD website. This is a little bit of a model that I came up with in terms of trying to get a sense of how to view things from an organisational perspective, but also user experience perspective. And that's something that I'll continue to iterate and kind of use to try to enhance what we do. And finally, I think it's important that whatever we do going forward, it has to be better for people.
Our next speaker is a well-known medical educator and a practicing GP and director of a primary health organisation, Dr. Rawiri Jansen, and he's going to speak from his perspective. Thanks.
Kia ora. I'm the highlight of your afternoon. this button, bro. Kia ora, I'm Rawiri Jansen. I'm Clinical Director for the National Hauora Coalition, primary healthcare organisation, 30 general practices, 130,000 patients, 5 different district health board areas. I'm also clinical lead for the Mana Kids program. We provide a comprehensive nurse-led health service in 65 high-needs schools in South Auckland, serving 27,000 children every day. 80% of those are Māori and Pacific children. And I'm the medical director at Papakura Marae. And we have 3,500 patients, and 96% of them are Māori, Pacific and high needs. It's a really remarkable clinic. We've achieved all of the national health targets since June 2017 and consistently since then. Oh, applause. And the National Hauora Coalition has a platform called Mōhio, which is our information platform, and that helps us deliver the right information about the patients to the clinician. And so there's a thread that kind of joins all those things together. Yes, health outcomes, equity. I want to improve outcomes for Māori patients. And that drives everything that the National Hauora Coalition does. So if it doesn't improve outcomes for Māori, we're not that interested in it. And so I come along to hack Aotearoa and the remarkable talents and diverse experiences that you guys are, and I want to recruit you to a task as well, so game on. Oh, no, go back to this one. Here you go. Any reasonable analysis will acknowledge the truth in this slide, that what we do in clinic has a contribution to make to health outcomes, but what happens, what exists, what's real outside the clinic has a much bigger contribution to health outcomes. So if we want to improve health outcomes, we need to be responsible, we need to be accountable, we need to be thinking about all that happens outside of the clinic. We need to address unconscious bias, racism. It's a big job, but it is our job as health professionals. And I think we have a role in contributing to the risk and protective factors and the health behaviours and the physical environment and so on and so forth. Okay, and so you saw one of those slides I showed you that we do a program in healthy homes. And so the UFI program identifies and assesses housing needs and can provide housing literacy and curtains and carpets and heating and ventilation and beds and bedding, and it can help families ensure that they get their full entitlements from Ministry of Social Development. We also have a program of action that works with MSD, helping our patients and clients of MSD to be able to get them back to work. Anyway, so I've got a big idea. I want to influence and redirect primary care, or the whole healthcare system really, so that we can achieve equity for Māori. It comes from something Peter and I talked about years ago. We talked about set a date for equity, but you guys were too slow, so I've set the date. 2040. In 2040, we will be celebrating 200 years since the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, and I'm hoping that we celebrate that and we don't have a big protest. I'm available for protesting if you don't get the job done. So if we dismantle the big idea, achieve equity by 2040, it helps to get granular and think about our cohort. And so I've got a cohort in mind for you. Every Māori who turns 21 in the year 2040, we're going to have a big party because they turn 21, we have a party. You know what I'm saying? Makes sense, right? You turn 21, you have a party. Well, we as a nation are going to celebrate their achievements and their successes. So if we're going to do that, we have to think about what are the employment outcomes, what's equity look like in terms of income or educational qualification. We need to get less of them arrested. We need less of them imprisoned. Hey, we've got to get some work done there. We need to work in the secondary school space. We need to work in the primary school space. We work backwards. We need to work in primary care. We've got to get all those immunisations done. We've got to get dental health done. Some of you have already figured out that cohort, which I estimate will be 18,600 Māori babies born this year. Those are the pregnancies right now. We have to get busy with all those pregnant mothers. We have to make sure that all of them get access to their antenatal vaccinations. We know exactly how many of them. I'm saying exactly. Some of them are still busy getting made. You know it. But we've got an idea of exactly how many people we're working with. So we have to collect the right data and, you know, create actionable intelligence out of it and get busy and do it. And I like that invitation from the Z-Man who said, see you at Aotearoa 2020, because I want to recruit people to be part of this. This is a big complex one, and it means that we have to be able to access and collect and then use that data that sits in a whole lot of different places. Yeah? It doesn't just sit in the health system. And because it sits in all those places, it's really quite complex as to how we get it and use it and then make it actionable back into those places. It's a good idea, right? Yeah. Come on, louder, bigger. It's a big idea, people. Okay, so I do want to work with judges and make sure that judges know what are the opportunities and how they can change what they do. I want to work with the police and make sure they arrest less and they've got some, you know, skill sets that makes them competent to do different things with young Māori men. And I want to work with schools and education institutes, and I want us to do all of this together, and I'm inviting you to be part of that. You're welcome.
Our last speaker is Rochelle Stile, and Rochelle is a lawyer with a Master's in Bioethics and Health Law. She's an independent researcher, but she's active as a member of the Northern A Health and Disability Ethics Committee, and we're very delighted that you can come along and join us this afternoon. Thank you, Rochelle.
Kia ora. One of my New Year's resolutions is to run the Queenstown Half Marathon in November. I wasn't expecting to start my training here in January with the portmanteau of a hack and a marathon, but here I am, although slightly bewildered about having to do a sprint talk. I understand that a hack is intended to collaboratively solve problems. Late last year, I gave a talk, AI and Ethics, Houston, we have a problem. Actually, there are a few problems there, or challenges, to frame it more optimistically. For this sprint, I'm going to touch on autonomy, transparency and explainability, and outline a few principles and key ideas, share a story with you about Max, a fictitious patient, and bring those principles to life in the unique context of Aotearoa. When we finish the sprint, I hope to have raised your awareness of some ethical issues and to challenge your thinking. So some key points. Data is the fuel for AI. Real people are behind the data. Andrew well illustrated that for us yesterday. Ethical principles require respect for individuals' autonomy, which means individuals are able to make their own decisions. It means self-rule. Respecting autonomy can be achieved by consent or, in the justified absence of consent, by being transparent. New Zealand law restricts the use of health information for purposes other than that for which it was collected, but there are research exceptions. New Zealand law also requires transparency, telling an individual that their identifiable health information is being collected, the purposes of the collection, and the intended recipients. Ordinary people who are the sources of the information should not be surprised about the way in which their data is being used. They should grasp about how it's going to be used, and the purposes should be for reasons that they both expect and accept. Moral agency or value is not acknowledged if a person is treated as someone who doesn't warrant an explanation, and transparency builds trust, which is fundamental to the research endeavour and underpins sustainable and effective public data use. Once trust is lost, it is very hard to restore. So what does all of this mean for AI healthcare? Let me share with you Max's story. Max, a fictitious 30-year-old male Māori, is HIV positive and has type 2 diabetes. He's critically unwell in ICU. He's had blood tests taken specifically to look at his blood glucose levels because the clinicians are concerned about the risk of hypoglycemia. He has multiple other tests and images taken, all for the purposes of treating him. His information is submitted to the ANZ ICS database, which has a minimum dataset requirement of over 100 variables, including the usual stuff, plus HIV status and glucose concentration values, a patient identifier, a residential postcode, Indigenous status, and a statistical linkage key. Max's data is also added to a training data set for an AI tool, which is designed by a private AI company. It predicts the optimal way to avoid hypoglycemia by determining when to start IV insulin. Conventionally, that would be when blood glucose exceeds 10 millimoles per litre, but there is evidence that there's improved outcomes if you start treatment at 14. So Max is part of some exciting AI research which promises great benefit to future diabetic patients like him, but he hasn't consented to his data being included in the database or the AI dataset. Actually, he's quite surprised to learn there's a database located outside New Zealand and that his data has been transferred overseas. An additional piece of information about Max is that he's a Jehovah's Witness, and his religious beliefs prohibit the collection and storage of blood and its use for research. He's also very sensitive about his HIV status. And if he'd been asked or even told about the database or the AI dataset, he would have objected to the inclusion of his data, even if anonymised. And as a sidebar, this story illustrates the challenge to the general assumption that anonymisation prevents harm. Max is also concerned about whether consideration has been given to principles of the Māori data sovereignty and Te Ara Tika. For him, his data is taonga. It's a treasure. There are many hack challenges I put to you. Should Max's consent have been sought to include his data in the database and the AI training tool dataset? What type of consent? Opt-in, opt-out? Are there too many Maxes to be bothered with trying to get consent from all of them? Does Max have an obligation of reciprocity to allow his data to be used for research as part of a social contract? Should every patient be a research patient? Should Max keep his data in a data vault? What about data ownership? Should we discard those notions and move more towards a data rights model? If we weighed the benefits and the risks of harm, where would the balance lie? Does it matter that the AI tool has been developed by a private company? Is there a social licence for that? And I bring to mind here the Google DeepMind health furore caused by the Streams app development. What about public engagement, people's assemblies? Should we involve citizens to build social values into the AI design as part of an ethics by design approach? Should Max be given an explanation of the database and the tool? Honora O'Neill said we are finite, ignorant and vulnerable agents with limited cognitive capacities, limited abilities to choose and limited time within which to choose, and we shouldn't be expected to perform heroic or even impossible cognitive feats of understanding. What would we tell Max anyway? The statistical models, whether we've detected bias and how we can fix it, what it's optimised for? Should we seek understanding rather than explainability? Is it enough to know that the thermometer is reliable, not how it actually works? There are plenty of potential solutions, oversight by algorithmists, an FDA for algorithms, tools like AI ethical frameworks and matrices, algorithmic impact assessments, and Turing box assessments, or embedding ethics itself into AI. But my finish line message to you is to echo the comments of Emmanuel Macron as he